There was a time I thought doing the right thing would lead to clarity, that if I just worked harder, prayed more, made fewer mistakes, eventually God's plan would unfold like a map. But it didn't. What unfolded was silence, confusion, long seasons of doing everything I thought was right and still feeling lost. And I don't mean lost in some dramatic, rock-bottom kind of way. I mean the quiet kind, where life looks fine on the outside, but inside, you're running on fumes. I used to think God's will was something I had to find, like a hidden path I might miss if I wasn't paying attention. So I pressured myself, overthought everything, kept asking, is this it? Is this what God wants? All the while, I ignored the part of me that was exhausted. Not from sin or rebellion, but from trying to be someone God never asked me to be. I was chasing purpose while ignoring peace and calling it obedience. I've come to believe that most men don't feel far from God because they're weak or unfaithful. They feel far because no one taught them how to walk with God in the middle of real life. Deadlines, family pressure, hidden temptation, the feeling of being responsible for everything and not allowed to fall apart. We were taught how to perform, not how to need. So we carry it, the weight, the questions, the guilt for even asking. We get good at pretending we're okay. We lead, we show up, we smile. But somewhere deep, the question keeps echoing, God, what do you actually want from me? Not in a dramatic, rebellious tone, but in a tired whisper. The kind that rises in the dark after everyone else is asleep. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to impress him. And that's where this starts. Not with certainty, not with confidence, but with that question. The one you may not even say out loud. The one that's been growing beneath the noise. You don't need a new motivational message. You don't need a perfect plan. You just need to know you're not the only one asking, and that maybe, just maybe, the silence isn't absence. Maybe it's invitation to stop chasing the right answer and start walking with the truth. There's a difference between believing in God and actually walking with Him. Most men I know believe. Deep down, they do. They believe God exists. They believe He's good. But when it comes to real-life decisions, the kind that happen in silence, under pressure, in the middle of a long week, they're alone. Not because they've turned their back on God, but because no one showed them how to bring Him into the mess. They were taught how to behave, how to follow rules, how to show up strong, but they were never taught how to walk with God as a man, with flaws, with weight, with responsibilities that don't pause when their faith feels shaky. What blocks most men from living with Christ at the center isn't some rebellion or sin they're hiding, it's pressure. The kind that builds when you're the one holding everything together, when you can't afford to fall apart, when people depend on you and there's no room to admit you're lost. So little by little, you learn to rely on yourself. You start carrying more than you should. You get good at making things happen, solving problems, pushing through. And without even noticing, you move God to the margins, not out of pride, but out of survival. The world trains you to perform, not to listen. It tells you that if you don't lead, everything will fall apart, that you need to be strong, clear, productive, always. So even when you pray, you're still in control. You're asking God to bless your plan, not break it. You want His will, but you're afraid of what it might cost. Because surrender sounds good until it means letting go of something real, your timeline, your idea of success, your ability to fix it on your own. And no one teaches you how to trust when you're tired of trusting. I used to think knowing God's will meant having clarity, a sign, a confirmation. But now I think it means having proximity. Jesus didn't say, figure me out. He said, follow me. And that's hard when you're used to being the one people follow, when letting someone else lead feels like weakness. But Christ never asked you to be impressive. He asked you to be close, to be available, to stay near even when nothing makes sense. That kind of closeness doesn't come through discipline alone. It comes through honesty. Real, unfiltered honesty, the kind most men are afraid to offer even to themselves. When you sit with God not to get something, not to perform, not to prove, but just to be real, to admit that you don't know what to do, that you're tired, that the pressure is wearing you down, that you still believe but you don't know how to walk this out anymore. And somehow even that raw honesty becomes the beginning of alignment. There are days when I still feel unsure, when I pause and ask God what He wants and I get silence in return. And in those moments, I've learned not to panic, not to assume the silence means I've failed. Sometimes the silence is space for my will to quiet down, space for me to stop rushing and start listening. And in that space, I've begun to recognize something deeper. His voice doesn't always sound like instruction. Sometimes it feels like peace, like a moment of stillness that doesn't make sense but somehow feels safe. Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice." But recognizing a voice takes time. It takes familiarity. You only know someone's voice when you've been around them long enough, often enough, to recognize their tone even in the noise. So the question becomes, are you giving God enough time to be familiar? Not religious time, not forced devotionals, but space, room in your schedule, in your thoughts, in your decisions, for Him to be more than an idea, for Him to be a presence. When Christ is at the center, life doesn't get easier, but it gets clearer. You start to notice the difference between decisions made from fear and ones made from faith. You notice how much of your life is built on pressure and how little peace you actually feel. You begin to hear a different voice inside you, one that isn't pushing or proving or controlling, but guiding, quietly, firmly, steadily. And from that place, everything starts to shift, not overnight, but deeply. So maybe the will of God isn't a destination. Maybe it's not a job title or a perfect plan. Maybe it's the quiet decision to walk closely with Christ right where you are, to bring Him into your next choice, your next conversation, your next silent frustration. Maybe it's about presence before direction, intimacy before clarity. And maybe that's enough for today. Just notice what's been driving you, the pressure, the noise, the silence you've been avoiding, and the moments when God has been speaking even when you weren't listening. Let that be where it starts. Sometimes the most spiritual thing a man can do is slow down, not to escape life, but to face it with eyes open. When we rush through the day, we start calling busyness purpose and anxiety responsibility. We confuse the noise with direction, and somewhere in that rhythm, God's voice gets buried. His will doesn't come through chaos, it comes through presence. And presence can't be forced. It has to be chosen, moment by moment, like a man who decides to listen instead of just react. If you want to walk in God's will, start with margin. Not just empty time in your calendar, but emotional space to breathe. That means you might have to disappoint a few people to stay honest. You might need to let go of your need to control the outcome. God's will is not something you conquer, it's something you allow. When you give Him room, He fills it. Not always with answers, but with clarity. And sometimes clarity is exactly what your spirit has been waiting for. For me, it started when I stopped trying to make every moment productive. I remember sitting in my truck after a long day, engine off, keys still in my hand, and instead of rushing home to the next task, I just sat. No music, no words, just silence. At first, it felt like a waste of time, but then something settled in me, a peace I couldn't manufacture. That's when I realized God doesn't just want to speak through sermons and songs. He meets us in the quiet spaces we usually skipped. If you're looking for something practical, begin here. First, create a space in your week where you don't have to perform. Not for your boss, not for your wife, not even for yourself. Let that be sacred. Second, before you make a decision you're unsure about, pause, just long enough to ask, God, is this from you? And then actually listen, not for thunder, but for alignment. Third, ask yourself daily, is Christ at the center of this, or am I? That one question can shift everything. God's will isn't always about what to do, sometimes it's about how to be. A man in God's will moves slower, but with more strength. He doesn't need to force his way because he knows he's not alone. He doesn't fear uncertainty because he trusts the one who sees the road ahead. And he stops living to impress because he finally knows who he is. That's what happens when you stop chasing clarity and start walking with Christ. We live in a world that tells us we need to be more productive, more decisive, more consistent. But God isn't asking you to be more. He's asking you to be His. That doesn't mean abandoning your responsibilities. It means surrendering the belief that your identity comes from how well you carry them. His will isn't proven through your performance. It's revealed through your dependence, through the quiet trust of a man who no longer needs to pretend he's got it all figured out. The older I get, the more I realize strength isn't found in having answers. It's found in knowing where to lean when life gets heavy. And sometimes the most powerful step you can take is to stop, to admit that you don't know, to give God space to guide you, not through signs and wonders, but through peace, through the steady voice that whispers when the rest of the world keeps shouting. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. So if you're still wondering what God's will is for your life, maybe you're already closer than you think. Maybe it's not about the next big decision or the perfect plan. Maybe it's about walking honestly with Christ in the middle of your current mess. Maybe it's about looking at the life you already have and asking, where have I been doing this alone? And what would it look like to let Him in, here, now, exactly as it is? If that resonates with you, stay. This isn't a place for performance. It's not about being a better Christian or checking spiritual boxes. This is a place for men who want to walk awake, not perfect, but present, not religious, but real. If you've been looking for a space to grow, to question, to walk with God without the pressure to have it all together, this channel was built for that, for you, for us, for the journey. May God bless you deeply, and may you walk awake with Christ at the center.